Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's quirk created living shadows of his past selves. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, had always been a place of vibrant color. It was the crimson of Endeavor's flames, the brilliant gold of All Might's hair, the shocking pink of Ishido's skin. It was a kaleidoscope of the extraordinary, a world he desperately wanted to be a part of, but could only press his face against the glass to observe. Today, however, the colors had bled out. The world was gray. The concrete of the sidewalk, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun, the bland facade of the apartment buildings. It was all a uniform, soul-crushing monochrome. All Might's words echoed in his head, a funeral knell for a dream he'd carried for 15 years. It's not bad to dream, young man. But you have to be realistic. Realistic. The word was a physical weight in his chest. Realistic meant accepting the truth he'd been fighting since he was 4 years old, sitting in a doctor's office with a single, damning X-ray of his foot. The extra joint in his pinky toe was a brand, a permanent mark of his exclusion from the grand, chaotic, wonderful world of quirks. He was a bug in a world of birds, destined to crawl while everyone else soared. He clutched the straps of his yellow backpack, his knuckles white. Inside, his burnt and waterlogged notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13, felt like a brick of pure shame. All his observations, his theories, his desperate, pathetic attempts to bridge the gap between his reality and his dream with intellect alone, were now just the ramblings of a fool, a quirkless fanboy who got in the way. A voice in his head, a familiar one that sounded like a smaller, more frightened version of himself, whispered, "You should have just gone home. You shouldn't have bothered him. You wasted his time." Another voice, sharper and more acidic, chimed in. "Kaken was right all along. You're just a pebble. A worthless Deku." He shook his head, trying to dislodge the thoughts. It was one thing to be told you were useless by your childhood friend, by your classmates, by society at large. It was another thing entirely to have it confirmed by your God. That's when he heard it. A distant boom, sharp and concussive, echoing between the buildings. It was followed by the panicked shriek of sirens. Every nerve ending in his body, honed by years of hero-worshipping instinct, fired at once. His feet, which had been dragging him home like anchors, stopped. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the skyline for smoke. A dark plume was rising a few streets over, near the Takoba Municipal Shopping District. "Go home," the fearful voice insisted. "It's not your business. You're not a hero. You can't do anything." But another part of him, the part that had filled 13 notebooks, the part that still thrilled at the sight of a hero leaping into action, pulled him forward. It was a magnetic, irresistible force. He wasn't thinking. He was just moving, his backpack bouncing against his spine as he broke into a run. The gray world suddenly shot through with the stark, terrifying colors of an emergency. He arrived to a scene of controlled chaos. A narrow alleyway between a convenience store and a pachinko parlor had become a war zone. Flames licked up the sides of the buildings, spitting black smoke into the sky. Pro-heroes were on the scene. The forestry hero Kamui Woods was evacuating civilians. The powerhouse Death Arms was trying to brute force his way through the crowd, and Backdraft was desperately trying to contain the inferno with waves of water. The source of the chaos was a monstrous entity of living sludge, a writhing, amorphous blob with manic, terrified eyes and a mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. It was the same villain All Might had saved him from not an hour ago. A cold dread, slick and oily, coated Izuku's heart. "It's my fault." He remembered clinging to All Might's leg, the wind whipping past them. He remembered the villain, contained in 2 soda bottles, must have slipped from All Might's pocket during that frantic, ill-advised flight. He had caused this. His selfish, reckless actions had unleashed this monster back onto the city. The crowd buzzed with commentary. "That villain's got someone! A hostage! Why aren't the heroes doing anything? Kamui Woods can't get close, the fire is his weakness. And the villain's body is too fluid for Death Arms to get a grip." Izuku pushed his way to the front, his breath catching in his throat. He saw it then. Trapped within the suffocating, liquid filth, was a boy. He was struggling, thrashing, creating explosions that did nothing but set the surrounding area on fire, making it harder for the heroes to approach. And through the murky green sludge, Izuku saw a familiar shock of spiky, ash-blonde hair and furious red eyes. Katsuki Bakugo. The world didn't just go gray. It shattered into a million fractured pieces. Time seemed to slow, to warp around him. He saw Kaken's eyes, wide with a mixture of rage and genuine, primal fear. He was suffocating. He was drowning on dry land. And for the briefest, blackest of moments, a thought slithered through Izuku's mind, a venomous whisper from the deepest, most wounded part of his soul. Good. The thought was so vile, so unlike him, that it jolted him more than the explosions. It was the voice of every Deku, every useless, every sneer and burn mark Kaken had ever given him. It was the small, petty part of him that wanted to see the bully get his just desserts. But then he saw Kaken's eyes again. And in them, he didn't see a bully. He saw a kid who was going to die. A kid whose eyes were pleading. Not to Izuku, not to anyone in particular. They were the desperate, silent plea of any living thing that did not want to be extinguished. And no one was helping him. The heroes were waiting. Waiting for someone with the right quirk. Waiting for a perfect opportunity that wasn't coming. They were being realistic. In that instant, Izuku's mind fractured completely. There was the part of him that was screaming in abject terror. You'll die. Don't go. He's a monster. You're quirkless. You're nothing. There was the part of him that was coldly analyzing the situation. The eyes. The villain's real body is vulnerable around the eyes. If I can create a distraction, maybe he'll loosen his grip for a second. Just 1 second. There was the dark, resentful part, still seething with years of pain. Why should it be you? Why do you have to be the one to risk everything for him? And then there was the final part. The part that had watched the video of All Might's debut 1,000 times. The part that believed, against all evidence, in the simple, profound truth of saving people. It didn't scream or analyze or seethe. It simply acted. Before his brain could process the decision, his legs were moving. He burst through the police tape, a flash of green and black against the fiery backdrop. Hey! Kid! Stop! Death Arms yelled, but Izuku couldn't stop. It felt as though a profound, metaphysical tearing was happening inside him. It wasn't a physical pain, but a psychic schism, a sound like ripping silk that only he could hear. The world swam, colors bleeding at the edges of his vision. He felt a strange weightlessness, as if parts of him were peeling away, separating like layers of an onion. A shimmering distortion clung to his right ankle. He glanced down and saw, for a heart-stopping second, an almost transparent afterimage of himself at 4 years old, crying in front of the computer. It was small and trembling, its shadowy fingers digging into his leg, trying to pull him back, to drag him away from the danger and back into the safety of the crowd. Its silent scream was pure, undiluted fear. At the same time, another piece of him surged forward. It was a shadow cast in front of him, but it wasn't behaving like a normal shadow. It was more solid, more defined, glowing with a faint, heroic green light. It was the shape of him, but taller, more confident, the hero he always dreamed of being. It moved with a purpose he didn't feel, a courage he didn't possess. It was pure, selfless heroism, untainted by doubt or terror. Izuku Midoriya, the boy, was frozen in the middle, a nexus of warring impossibilities. He was being pulled backward by his own fear and propelled forward by his own courage. His conscious mind, the small part of him that was still in control, did the only thing it could. He swung his backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. Kaken! The heavy bag sailed through the air, and its contents, books, pencils, his ruined notebook, spilled out, striking the sludge villain directly in the eye. The monster flinched, roaring in annoyance. For a single, crucial second, its grip on Bakugo loosened. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? Bakugo choked, managing to gasp in a pocket of air. Izuku didn't answer. He was clawing at the sludge, his fingers sinking into the viscous, foul-smelling substance. But it wasn't just him. The glowing green shadow, his valor, was there too, its solid-looking hands plunging deep into the villain, physically trying to pry its suffocating mass off of Bakugo. Simultaneously, The trembling shadow, his fear, was still latched onto his real body, a phantom weight of pure dread trying to make him flee. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die! Izuku screamed, tears and sweat carving paths through the grime on his face. He looked at Bakugo, and for the first time in his life, he saw something other than pride in his friend's eyes. He saw gratitude. And it was terrifying. Just a little longer! A hero will come! Izuku grunted, his arms burning, his lungs screaming for air. The sludge was starting to creep up his own arms, cold and suffocating. The fearful shadow at his ankle pulsed with terror, whispering, "You're going to be next. Run!" The valor shadow in front of him strained, its form flickering, its green light dimming under the strain. He was fighting a losing battle on two fronts, one against the villain, and one against himself. Then, a new shadow fell over them all. "I really am pathetic," a booming, familiar voice said. Izuku looked up. All Might stood there, his iconic smile gone, replaced by a look of grim self-recrimination. He had seen it all, not just the reckless charge of a quirkless boy, but the bizarre, shimmering phenomenon that surrounded him. He'd seen the spectral manifestation of courage trying to save a life, and the cowering ghost of fear trying to save its host. "I told you the traits of a hero," All Might said, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "That your body moved before you had a chance to think." He grabbed Izuku and Bakugo, pulling them away from the villain. "Now I must practice what I preach." His fist drew back, muscles bulging beyond human limits. Detroit. Smash! The punch didn't even need to connect. The sheer air pressure it generated was a physical thing, a localized hurricane. The sludge villain was atomized, blasted apart into a million harmless droplets. The sky, which had been choked with smoke, was suddenly clear. And then, the clouds themselves seemed to react to the change in pressure. It began to rain. A gentle shower fell over the scene, dousing the last of the flames, washing the street clean. The crowd stared in stunned silence for a moment before erupting into a deafening roar of cheers. Izuku stood there, trembling, soaked to the bone. The two shadows, his valor and his fear, had vanished, dissolving back into him the moment All Might had taken control. But he could still feel them. He felt hollowed out, drained, as if he had expended not just physical energy, but parts of his very soul. The aftermath was a blur. The pro-heroes, now that the danger was past, rushed in. Some praised All Might. Others converged on him. "That was reckless, kid! You could have gotten yourself killed!" Death Arm scolded, his face stern. "There's bravery, and then there's suicide," Kamui Woods added, retracting his wooden arms. "You're lucky All Might was here." Izuku could only nod, his head bowed in shame. He didn't have the energy to explain that he hadn't been in control, that something impossible had happened. He barely understood it himself. He glanced over at Bakugo, who was being attended to by paramedics. Bakugo was breathing heavily, his face clean of sludge but pale with shock. His crimson eyes met Izuku's, and for a second, there was no anger, no pride. Just a deep, unsettling confusion. He'd seen the shadows too. Izuku turned and walked away before anyone could stop him. He didn't want praise. He didn't want to be scolded. He just wanted to go home and pretend the entire, world-shattering day had never happened. He didn't get far. "DKU!" He flinched, turning to see Bakugo jogging to catch up with him. I never asked you to save me." Bakugo started, his voice rough, but lacking its usual bite. "I could have handled him myself. So don't think you can look down on me. Got it? I don't owe you anything." He was trying to reassemble his pride, but the words were clumsy, the bravado fragile. He shot one last, deeply conflicted look at Izuku. "And what the hell was that? That shining thing?" Before Izuku could even attempt to form an answer, Bakugo scoffed, shook his head, and stormed off, leaving Izuku alone with the dying light and the quiet hum of the city returning to normal. He was just turning the corner to his street, the weight of the day pressing down on him, when a familiar voice cut through the evening air. "I am here!" Izuku yelped as All Might, in his skeletal, true form, zipped out from a side street, coughing a fine spray of blood into his hand. "All Might? What are you doing here? How did you get away from the reporters?" Izuku stammered, his mind reeling. Ha! Evading the media is like a brisk walk for me. Toshinori Yagi wheezed, before doubling over in a coughing fit. That's not important. I came to talk to you, young man. Izuku's heart sank. Here it comes. The final lecture. The don't ever do that again. I came to thank you, All Might said, his voice soft but intense. And to apologize. But more than that. I need to ask you about what happened back there. About your quirk. Izuku stared at him, bewildered. The rain had plastered his green hair to his forehead. My quirk? All Might, I told you. I'm quirkless. What I did, it was stupid and No. All Might interrupted, his piercing blue eyes holding Izuku's gaze. They weren't the hollowed-out eyes of a sick man anymore. They were burning with an almost scientific curiosity. I'm not talking about your charge. I'm talking about what I saw. What we all saw. Young man, you were surrounded by apparitions. Ghosts of yourself. The breath caught in Izuku's lungs. He's seen it. He wasn't going crazy. There was a shadow of you, glowing, physically trying to tear that villain apart. All Might continued, his voice low. And there was another, a smaller one, clinging to you, trying to pull you away. I saw your body freeze in terror, but your heroic spirit, a literal, tangible spirit, lunged forward anyway. You weren't just acting recklessly. Your very soul was fighting a war with itself. That, young Midoriya, is no mundane phenomenon. That is a quirk. Izuku felt his knees go weak. A quirk. All this time. But it wasn't strength, or fire, or flight. It was this chaotic, emotional schism. But it's never happened before, he whispered, his voice trembling. Hasn't it? All Might countered gently. Think. Have you ever felt that pull? That sensation of being two people at once? A part of you that wants to run and hide, and a part that wants to stand and fight? Quirks, especially powerful ones, often lie dormant until a moment of extreme stress or profound emotional resonance. You, a boy who believed himself to be quirkless, faced a life-or-death situation involving someone you have a deep, complex history with. Your guilt, your fear, and your desperate, innate need to save him. It was the perfect catalyst. Your quirk didn't just activate. It detonated. The pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. The feeling of being pulled apart. The distinct, warring voices in his head becoming tangible things. He looked down at his own shadow, cast long on the pavement by a street lamp. It seemed normal now, but he knew what lay dormant within it. Ghosts. Ghosts of himself. Tears began to well in Izuku's eyes, hot and unstoppable. He wasn't crying from sadness or relief. It was something far more complicated. All Might let out a long, weary sigh. I was wrong, young man. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. I was projecting my own limitations, my own history onto you. I am a hypocrite, because today, you, a boy who thought he had nothing, proved that a hero is not defined by the power they are given, but by the will that drives them. And your will is so strong, it literally tore itself from your body to save someone. He stood up straighter, and for a moment, Izuku could almost see the specter of his muscle form around his skeletal frame. Izuku Midoriya, he said, his voice resonating with a power that had nothing to do with muscles. You asked me if you could be a hero. And I gave you the wrong answer. He looked Izuku straight in the eye, and the world seemed to hold its breath. You can become a hero, the words. The same words he had yearned to hear his entire life. But they were different now. They weren't a comforting platitude. They were a statement of fact, a challenge, a pronouncement of a terrible and wonderful new reality. He had a quirk. A dangerous, unstable, terrifying quirk born from his own fractured heart. He collapsed to his knees, the tears finally breaking free, a torrent of 15 years of repressed hope and despair. He wasn't just crying anymore. He was sobbing, great, gasping sounds torn from his raw throat. All Might simply stood there, a silent, patient sentinel, letting the boy break so he could begin to piece himself back together. When the sobs subsided into shuddering breaths, All Might spoke again, his tone shifting to one of absolute seriousness. But your path will be harder than most. That power, it is you. It is your fear, your courage, your doubt, your rage. It's born from your memories and your emotions. If you don't learn to control it, to command it, it will tear you apart. Villains won't be your greatest enemy, young man. You will be. He knelt, bringing himself eye to eye with the devastated boy. I was looking for a successor. Someone to inherit my power, my quirk, one for all. He offered a small, sad smile. But you don't need my power. You have your own, a power that might be even more volatile and personal than mine. So, I will make you a different offer. Let me train you. Let me teach you to master the storm inside you. Let me help you become the leader of the voices in your head, not their puppet. Let me help you become the hero you were born to be. Izuku looked up, his face a mess of tears and dirt. He saw not a symbol of peace, but a mentor. A teacher. A man offering him not a gift, but a chance to take the broken pieces of himself and build a hero from the wreckage. He could only manage a single, choked word. Okay. Later that night, long after his mother had cried with relief and fussed over him, long after he'd eaten dinner in a daze and showered away the grime of the day, Izuku stood in front of the full-length mirror on his bedroom door. The room was dark, save for the moonlight filtering through his all-might-themed curtains. His reflection was just a boy. A normal, scrawny, green-haired boy in an All Might t-shirt. There was nothing special about him, but All Might had seen it. Kaken had seen it. He had felt it. He closed his eyes, his heart pounding. He didn't focus on a command. He focused on a feeling. He remembered the absolute, gut-wrenching terror as the sludge villain's shadow fell over him, the certainty of death. He let that feeling wash over him, embracing the cold dread. When he opened his eyes, something had changed. To the left of his reflection, shimmering like a heat haze, was a second Izuku. It was smaller, younger, the image of him at 4 years old in his all-might onesie. It was translucent, its form flickering and indistinct. It trembled constantly, its shadowy hands clutching its own arms, its eyes wide with a permanent, silent scream. It was his fear, given form. Then, he changed his focus. He remembered the sight of Kaken's pleading eyes. He remembered the desperate, selfless urge that had sent his legs pumping, the singular, unwavering thought, I have to save him. He poured all his heroic desire into that memory. To the right of his reflection, another figure solidified. This one was sharper, more solid than the other. It was his age, but it stood taller, its shoulders back, its chin up. A faint, verdant light pulsed from its core, catching the moonlight. It wasn't smiling, but its expression was one of calm, resolute determination. It was his courage, his ideal, made manifest. Izuku stared, his breath hitched in his throat. In the mirror, he was no longer alone. He was flanked by the two warring ghosts of his own soul, the terrified child who was told he was nothing, and the valiant hero he always dreamed he could be. He looked at the boy in the center, his actual reflection. The one who was scared and brave, weak and strong, all at once. The one who now had to command the others. A single thought, clear as a bell, echoed in the sudden silence of his mind. This is the first day of my life. The sun had not yet breached the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and soft, fleshy pink. The air that rolled off the sea was cold and heavy with the scent of salt, brine, and a metallic tang of decay that was unique to this place. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park wasn't a park. It was a landfill that had lost a war with the ocean. For generations, illegal dumping driven by the tides had turned a once scenic coastline into a graveyard of rusted appliances, skeletal cars, and mountains of forgotten trash. It was a monument to societal neglect, sprawling and seemingly insurmountable. It was the perfect place to build a hero from scratch. Izuku Midoriya stood before it, his small frame looking even smaller against the backdrop of junk. He shivered, though not entirely from the cold. Beside him, a gaunt, skeletal man who looked like he might be swept away by a strong gust of wind, leaned heavily on a guardrail. This isn't my boy, Toshinori Yagi said, his voice a wheezing rasp. Your training ground. Your classroom. And your first opponent. Izuku stared at the mountain of refuse. All of it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The scale of the task was astronomical. It would take a whole team of pro heroes with construction quirks months to clear this. All of it, Toshinori confirmed, a sharp glint in his sunken eyes. He held up a detailed, hand-drawn schedule. The American Dream Plan, he'd called it. It was a meticulous 10-month regimen of diet, sleep, and grueling physical exercise. This plan was originally designed to prepare a vessel for my quirk, one for all, to forge a body strong enough to contain an incredible power without blowing its limbs off. He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. The principle, however, remains the same. Your body must become strong, not just to be a hero, but to be a stable anchor for your soul. Izuku nodded, understanding. His quirk, this bizarre, terrifying chronoshade, wasn't a tool he picked up. It was him. And if the vessel was weak, the contents would spill. We have 10 months until the UA entrance exam, Toshinori continued, his tone all business now. 10 months to turn you from a trembling boy into a commanding officer. The physical labor will build your muscles, your stamina. But more importantly, the strain, the exhaustion, the frustration, those will be the whetstones we use to sharpen your control. Now show me. Show you? Summon one, Toshinori said simply. On command. No villains, no life or death stakes. Just you, me, and a pile of garbage. Call forth your courage. Izuku took a deep breath. Okay. He could do this. He closed his eyes and tried to replicate the feeling from the day of the sludge villain. The desperate need to save Kaken. He thought of heroics, of All Might's smile, of the unwavering determination he'd felt manifest as a glowing green shadow. He focused, pushing the feeling forward, willing it into existence. He felt nothing. A faint flicker behind his eyelids, a brief sensation of warmth in his chest that vanished as quickly as it came. He opened his eyes. He was still alone. His shadow stretched out behind him, flat and lifeless in the growing dawn. I can't, he stammered, his shoulders slumping. I'm trying, but feelings aren't a tap you can turn on and off, my boy, Toshinori said, not unkindly. Especially not for you. Your quirk is reactive. We need to create the reaction. See that old refrigerator over there? He pointed to a yellowed, rust-eaten fridge half buried in the sand. Your first task. Move it to that pile of tires. By hand, Izuku looked at the fridge. It was a commercial-grade beast, heavy and waterlogged. He looked at his own spindly arms. This was impossible. The familiar, cold tendrils of fear snaked around his heart, and as they did, a faint shimmer appeared at his side. He saw it out of the corner of his eye, the small, trembling form of his 4-year-old self, a ghostly afterimage of despair. Flicker. It looked from the fridge to Izuku, its shadowy face a mask of silent panic. Ah, there we are, Toshinori noted, his gaze sharp. Fear is the easiest to summon, it seems. It's your baseline. Your default setting. That's the first thing we need to change. He clapped his hands together. Well? Get to it. The sun is rising, and we are burning moonlight. With a deep, shuddering breath, Izuku walked towards the refrigerator. Flicker trailed behind him, a constant, parasitic presence of dread. This was going to be a very, very long 10 months. The days bled into weeks, and the weeks into a month. Izuku's life became a simple, brutal rhythm: wake, train, school, train, sleep. Every morning before school and every evening after, Dagoba Beach was his crucible. Toshinori was a relentless taskmaster, pushing him far beyond what he thought were his limits. He hauled, he pushed, he lifted. His muscles screamed, his hands were covered in calluses and blisters, and his school uniform perpetually smelled of sweat and rust. He was getting stronger. He could feel it in the new, hard lines of his arms and legs, in the way he could now drag a washing machine a full 10 feet before collapsing. But control over Chronoshade remained agonizingly elusive. His echoes were uncooperative, unwelcome guests at his own internal party. When a pile of scrap metal shifted precariously, Flicker would manifest, his silent screams echoing in Izuku's head, causing him to drop what he was carrying. When he finally managed to summon valor, usually by focusing on a mental image of All Might saving someone, the heroic shadow would perform the feat of strength. But Izuku would be left feeling drained and hollow, having outsourced his own effort. He wasn't commanding it, he was just letting it take the wheel. This isn't working, young man, Toshinori said one afternoon. They were taking a 5-minute break, and Izuku was gasping for air, leaning against a stack of moldy tatami mats. You're treating valor like a tool, a simple strength enhancer. But he is a part of you. You're not integrating the feeling, you're just projecting it. We need to trigger the others. The more complex ones. Izuku paled. He didn't want to trigger the others. Flicker was bad enough. The idea of other, unknown parts of his psyche peeling away from him was terrifying. Let's try a different approach, Toshinori said, ignoring Izuku's apprehension. He gestured to a particularly chaotic heap of debris, a tangled mess of rebar, broken concrete, and twisted pipes. Forget brute strength. This is a problem of logistics. Your goal is to clear this specific pile by sunset. But you must do it with maximum efficiency and minimal risk of collapse. Analyze it. Formulate a plan. Tell me how you would do it, piece by piece. This, at least, was familiar territory. This was what his notebooks were for. Izuku's eyes narrowed, and he began to mutter, a habit so ingrained he wasn't even aware of it. Okay, so the primary issue is the structural integrity, or lack thereof. The rebar on the left is acting as a load-bearing element for that large concrete slab, but it's bent at a 40-degree angle and showing signs of extreme metal fatigue. If I move that first, the whole thing could come down. So I need to brace it. But with what? Those pipes? No, they're rusted through, their tensile strength is compromised. Maybe if I used that I-beam over there, but to move the I-beam, I'd have to clear a path, which means moving the tires. But the tires are what's stopping that filing cabinet from sliding, unless I could use the cabinet as a counterweight. But what's the friction coefficient of rusted metal on wet sand? His muttering grew faster, more frantic. The problem branched into a dozen subproblems, each with a dozen variables. His mind raced, a whirlwind of hypotheticals and potential failures. He was drowning in data. It's too complicated, he whispered, clutching his head. There are too many things that could go wrong. One mistake and it all comes down. It's not safe. The plan is flawed. Any plan is flawed. And there he is, Toshinori said quietly. Izuku blinked, his muttering cut short. He felt a strange coolness to his left, a subtle drop in temperature. He turned his head. Standing beside him, almost shoulder to shoulder, was a new Echo. It was his height, but hunched over as if carrying an immense weight. Its form was less solid than Valor's, more like dense, swirling smoke. Its head was bowed, and in its shadowy hands, it clutched a spectral notebook and pen, the tip of the pen scratching furiously against the page only it could see. It didn't look at Izuku. It was completely absorbed in its task, its posture radiating an aura of intense, anxious concentration. This was the physical embodiment of his muttering. Of his doubt. Of his obsessive, crippling over-analysis. I don't know what to do, Izuku said, his voice weak. He looked at the pile of junk, and now he couldn't see a puzzle to be solved. He only saw 1,000 points of failure, each one whispered into his ear by the hunched, scribbling shadow beside him. That won't work. You didn't account for this. It's a foolish risk. He was paralyzed. The task, which had been a mental exercise moments before, now seemed as impossible as clearing the whole beach in a day. He took a hesitant step forward, and the new Echo scribbled faster, a low, muttering sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement emanating from it. I can't, Izuku finally said, sinking to his knees in the sand. I'll just make it worse. Toshinori walked over and placed a bony hand on his shoulder. You've identified a new member of your team, young Midoriya. What this part of you represents, it's not inherently a weakness, but left unchecked, it will convince you that inaction is always the safest course. And inaction, for a hero, is a death sentence. Izuku stared at the scribbling shadow, at this newly birthed piece of his own soul. It was his intellect, his analytical mind. And it was his cage. The next few weeks were a new kind of hell. The hunched shadow, which Izuku had started thinking of as Murmur, was a constant companion. Every task Toshinori set for him was now filtered through a lens of crushing self-doubt. Lift that log, Toshinori would command. Your grip is wrong, Murmur would whisper in his mind. You'll strain your back. The wood is rotten, it will splinter. Run 5 laps around the beach perimeter. You're pacing yourself incorrectly. You'll burn out before the 3rd lap. Your form is inefficient. It was maddening. He felt like he was fighting with one hand tied behind his back, his own mind actively sabotaging him. He grew frustrated, angry at his own weakness, at his inability to just do the thing. The breaking point came on a sweltering afternoon in late August. The air was thick and humid, and every breath felt like swallowing hot soup. Izuku was trying to dislodge a massive, rust-fused engine block from a pit of sludge. He'd been at it for over an hour. His muscles burned, sweat stung his eyes, and Murmur was having a field day, listing every possible way this could result in a hernia or a snapped tendon. "Come on, young Midoriya! Put your back into it!" Toshinori called from the shade of a broken-down truck. "Your rival, young Bakugo, he isn't sitting around overthinking things. He's training, he's getting stronger. He's pushing forward while you're stuck in the mud. Do you want him to leave you in the dust forever?" The mention of Kaken was like a key in a lock. A sudden, white-hot flash of anger ripped through Izuku. It wasn't the righteous fire of a hero. It was ugly. It was petty. It was the accumulated rage of 1,000 paper cuts to the soul. Every sneer, every casual explosion, every time he'd been called Deku, not as a nickname but as a verdict, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of fury. He felt the telltale tearing sensation, but this one was different. It wasn't the cool detachment of Murmur or the hollow ache of valor. This was like ripping off a scab. It hurt. Wrath! Izuku roared, a sound of pure frustration. He wasn't alone anymore. A new echo stood beside him. This one was jagged, all sharp angles and cutting edges, like a figure made from broken glass. It was wiry and tense, vibrating with a low, aggressive hum. Its shadowy form seemed to suck the light out of the air around it, and its head was cocked in a familiar, arrogant sneer. It was pure, undiluted resentment. Spite. Before Izuku could process what was happening, the jagged shadow acted. It spun around and delivered a vicious, spectral kick to a nearby sheet of corrugated metal. The shadow's foot passed through it, but the force of its anger was somehow translated into reality. The rusty metal crumpled with a deafening clang, flying 10 feet through the air. "What's the matter, you piece of junk?" The spite echo snarled, and its voice was a distorted, hateful echo of Izuku's own. "Think you're better than me?" Izuku stared in horror. That was Kaken's taunt. Those were the words that had been screamed at him his whole life. And they were coming from a part of himself. The spite echo turned its sharp-edged glare on the engine block. With a guttural cry it lunged, not with strength, but with sheer, malicious violence. Its shadowy claws tore at the sludge, its form a blur of aggressive motion. It wasn't trying to lift the engine, it was trying to punish it, to hurt it. The display was so shocking, so unnerving, that Izuku stumbled backward, falling into the sand. He looked at his own hands, then at the snarling, jagged piece of his soul attacking an inanimate object. This was inside him. This ugly, hateful thing was a part of his quirk. A part of his potential as a hero. The thought made him feel sick. The spite echo eventually exhausted its fury, its form flickering and dissolving back into Izuku's shadow, leaving behind only the mangled piece of metal and a profound, ringing silence. Izuku just sat there, shaking. Flicker was there now, shimmering at his side, reflecting his terror at his own inner darkness. Murmur stood on his other side, scribbling furiously, no doubt cataloging this new, catastrophic failure. He was surrounded. Hemmed in by his own ghosts. Toshinori walked over, his expression unreadable. He looked at the dented metal, then at Izuku's pale face. He didn't scold. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply sat down in the sand next to his student. "Well," he said, after a long moment. "The whole gang's here, it seems." The sun was setting, bleeding orange and violet across the water. The day's training was over, but the lesson was just beginning. Izuku sat huddled, his arms wrapped around his knees, refusing to look at Toshinori. He was too ashamed. "I'm a monster," Izuku whispered, the words tasting like ash. "A hero can't have that inside him. That hatred. Every hero does, my boy," Toshinori said softly. He had a small, worn notebook of his own out, along with a pen. It looked strangely out of place in his bony fingers. Every human does. Anger. Fear. Doubt. You just have the unique and terrible privilege of seeing yours walk and talk. This is not a curse. It is a diagnostic tool, he gestured with his pen. We've been approaching this all wrong. We've been treating them like symptoms to be suppressed. But they're not. They are a part of your power. A part of your team, and a commander needs to know the names and capabilities of his soldiers. So let's do that. Let's give them names. Let's define their roles. He opened his notebook to a fresh page. Let's start with the first one. The one that came out to save young Bakugo. The glowing one, Izuku sniffled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. He feels like everything I want to be, he mumbled. Brave. Selfless. Unhesitating. Valor, Toshinori said, writing it down with a flourish. A good name. He is your ideal. Your goal. He represents your core drive to save others. He is the flag you march under. He underlined the name twice. Valor. Okay. Toshinori continued, his voice gentle but firm. Now, the one that tries to pull you back. The little one. Izuku pictured the trembling, translucent child. He's my fear. My despair. The voice that tells me I'm going to fail, that I'm not good enough. The day I was diagnosed quirkless, he feels like that day. So, you want to get rid of him? Yes. Izuku said immediately. No. Toshinori countered. A hero without fear is a fool who gets himself and others killed. Fear isn't cowardice, Izuku. It's the instinct that tells you to look both ways before crossing the street. It's the voice that warns you of danger. It keeps you alive. He isn't your despair. He is your caution. Your early warning system. Izuku stared at him. He'd never thought of it like that. He'd only ever seen flicker as a weakness. What shall we call him? Toshinori asked. Izuku thought for a moment. Flicker, he said. Because he's faint. And he shows up when things are about to go dark. Toshinori wrote it down. Flicker. A good, tactical name. Your scout. He tapped the page. Next. The analyst. The one who brought our training to a halt today with his calculations. Murmur. Izuku supplied the name he'd already been using. He doubts everything. Every plan. He paralyzes me, does he? Toshinori challenged. Or does he force you to consider variables you would have otherwise missed? Unquestioning courage is just recklessness, my boy. A hero who charges in without a plan is just a vigilante with a death wish. Murmur isn't your doubt. He is your strategist. He sees the flaws so you can correct them. He stress tests your plans before the enemy gets a chance to. This was reframing his entire world. The things he saw as his greatest flaws, All Might was polishing like gemstones, showing him the hidden facets. He wrote the name down. Murmur. Finally, they came to the last one. The jagged, angry one? Izuku flinched just thinking about it. And him, Toshinori said, his voice dropping. The one born of your anger towards young Bakugo. He's my resentment, Izuku said, his voice thick with shame. My hatred. He's... Spite. Yes, Toshinori said, his gaze distant, as if looking at a painful memory of his own. He is. And you are ashamed of him. You want to lock him in a box and never see him again. Am I wrong? Izuku could only nod, hot tears welling in his eyes again. That anger comes from a place of deep hurt, Izuku. From years of being told you were less than nothing. It is a poison that has been injected into you, drop by drop. To pretend it doesn't exist is to let the poison fester. But that fire, it is also a source of incredible energy. It is the fury that says, I will not be put down. It's the engine that drives you when simple courage isn't enough. Left untended, it will burn you and everyone around you. But aimed correctly? A fire like that can forge steel. He looked Izuku in the eye, his expression deadly serious. Righteous fury against injustice is one of a hero's most powerful weapons. Your task is not to extinguish that fire. It is to learn to aim it. to turn your personal resentment into a universal weapon against all bullies, all villains, all who would prey on the weak. He wrote the name down, his pen pressing hard into the paper. Spite. He turned the notebook so Izuku could see. The 4 names were listed there, neat and orderly. Valor, the hero. Flicker, the scout. Murmur, the strategist. Spite, the fighter. It wasn't a list of psychological problems. It was a roster. An army. His army. For the first time in months, Izuku looked at the vast, trash-strewn beach and didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt potential. He was not one boy against a mountain of junk. He was a legion. Toshinori snapped the notebook shut. The last light of day had faded, and the stars were beginning to emerge in the clear, sea-washed sky. He stood up, his joints cracking, and offered a hand to Izuku. The UA entrance exam is not just your goal anymore, my boy. It is your first major field test. It will be the first time you consciously lead this team into battle. You will not be judged on how many robots you can smash. You will be judged on how you command the forces within you. He looked out at the ocean, a faint smile on his thin lips. For years I believed that being a hero was about giving all of yourself to the world. About being a pillar, singular and unbreakable. But you are teaching me something new. Perhaps true strength isn't about being a pillar. Perhaps it's about acknowledging that you are made of countless, conflicting pieces, and having the will to bind them all together for a single purpose. He turned back to Izuku, and his smile was no longer tired. It was proud. A hero doesn't just use their strength, he said, his voice resonating with the faint, spectral power of all might. They use their whole self. Their fear becomes caution. Their doubt becomes strategy. Their anger becomes a fire to protect the innocent. You are all of them, Izuku Midoriya. Valor, flicker, murmur, and spite. You must become their leader, not their puppet. Izuku stood, his body aching but his spirit alight. He looked at his own shadow, long and dark on the sand. It no longer felt menacing. It felt full, pregnant with possibility. He could feel them, just beneath the surface. His fear, his doubt, his rage, and his courage. They weren't ghosts haunting him anymore. They were a squadron, waiting for their orders. He had 10 months. 10 months to become a conductor capable of leading this chaotic, internal orchestra. He looked at the half-cleared section of the beach, a testament to his work so far, and then at the mountains of trash that remained. The task was still immense, but for the first time, he truly believed it was possible. He was not alone. He would never be alone again. The gates of UA High School were not mere gates. They were a statement. A monumental arch of gleaming chrome and reinforced plasteel that soared towards the sky, forming the iconic U and A. They were less an entrance and more a promise, a shimmering threshold between the mundane world and the pantheon of heroes. For 15 years, Izuku had only seen them in pictures and on television, a distant, impossible dream. Standing before them now, a flesh-and-blood examinee with a numbered sticker on his jacket, the dream felt so close it was terrifying. The sheer scale of it was oppressive. The main building was a modernist masterpiece of blue-tinted glass and white steel, shaped like a colossal H, a testament to the staggering budget and prestige of the institution. Hundreds of other teenagers milled about, buzzing with a nervous energy that was almost a physical force. They were a living tapestry of the extraordinary. A girl with sleek, metallic wings folded neatly on her back chatted with a boy whose skin was made of what looked like granite. A trio of students casually juggled small globes of fire, light, and darkness between them. Everywhere Izuku looked, he saw confidence. He saw power. He saw people who belong. And then he saw himself, reflected in the polished surface of the gate, a scrawny kid with a mess of green hair, hunched in on himself, his hands clutching the straps of his backpack like a lifeline. He looked like a clerical error. A cold spot developed over his left shoulder, a familiar and unwelcome sensation. He didn't need to look to know who had just arrived. "You don't belong here," a voice whispered in his mind. It was the sound of a rustling leaf, of a book dropped in a silent library. It was the voice of Murmur. Statistically, the acceptance rate for UA's hero course is less than 1 in 300. That's a 0.33% chance. Your physical scores from the beach are adequate, but they plateaued a week ago. You're competing against candidates with 15 years of experience using combat-oriented quirks. You are at a significant disadvantage. As if summoned by the litany of doubt, another presence made itself known. A tremor ran through Izuku's right hand, his knuckles going white where he gripped his bag. To his right, just at the edge of his peripheral vision, a shimmering, translucent shape flickered into existence. It was Flicker, the ghost of his 4-year-old self, trembling with the psychic weight of every other examinee's power. They're all so strong, Flicker's silent terror washed over him, a wave of pure inadequacy. They're all staring. They know you're a fraud. You're going to fail. You're going to get hurt. We should go home. We should just go home right now. The two of them, his doubt and his fear, were a feedback loop of anxiety. Murmur provided the logical reasons for failure, and Flicker provided the raw, emotional terror. Together, they were a suffocating blanket. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He could feel his control slipping. No. The thought was a tiny point of light in the overwhelming darkness. No. I am in command. He closed his eyes for a second, right there in the middle of the crowded courtyard. He shut out the sight of the other students, the overwhelming architecture. He focused. He didn't try to banish Murmur or Flicker. Toshinori had taught him that was impossible, like trying to hold back the tide. Instead, he reached for a different feeling. He pictured the beach. Not the trash-filled nightmare it had been, but the clean, pristine coastline it was now. He remembered the feeling of the rising sun on his face on that final morning, standing beside Toshinori, looking at what his own 2 hands, and the hands of his echoes, had accomplished. He remembered All Might's voice, not the booming cymbal, but the quiet, firm mentor. You must become their leader, not their puppet. He channeled that feeling. The pride. The determination. The quiet, stubborn courage that had pushed him through 10 months of hell. A warmth spread through his chest, a steady, grounding presence. It pushed back the cold of Murmur, and soothed the trembling of Flicker. He felt his spine straighten, his shoulders pull back. When he opened his eyes, the world seemed a little less intimidating. He knew, without looking, that a third echo had manifested within his shadow, its faint green light a silent rebuttal to the other two. Valor. He couldn't see Valor, not fully, but he could feel him, a bastion of heroic will. He was the part of Izuku that believed he deserved to be here. He was the anchor in the storm. With a deep breath, Izuku took a step forward, crossing the threshold of the UA gates. He was still terrified. He was still riddled with doubt. But now, he was also courageous. He was the sum of his parts, and he was walking into battle. The written exam was a blur of frantic scribbling. Murmur was a constant, muttering presence, second-guessing every answer. Are you sure that's the correct application of the Good Samaritan clause in the Modern Heroics Act? My recollection suggests a subsection you've forgotten. Flicker, meanwhile, was convinced the ticking clock was accelerating, that his pencil lead would snap, that he was filling in the wrong bubbles on the answer sheet. Izuku had to actively fight to keep them at bay, using his focus on Valor as a shield. He would pause, take a breath, picture the cleared beach, and push through to the next question. It was a brutal, draining mental exercise, a war fought on a 3-foot desk. By the time the proctor called for pencils down, he was mentally exhausted, but he had finished. He had survived the first round. Then came the briefing for the practical exam. They were herded into a massive auditorium, the lights dimming to spotlight a stage where a single man stood, clad in leather and sporting a ridiculous directional hairdo. Wawayo, what's up, little listeners? Welcome to the main event! Can I get a yeah? The booming voice of Present Mike, the voice hero, hit the crowd like a physical wave. The response was dead silence. Flicker, who hated loud noises and sudden surprises, immediately flared up, making Izuku jump in his seat. It's too loud. It's overwhelming. I can't think. Tough crowd. Present Mike carried on undeterred. All right, let's get right to it. Here's the deal with your practical exam. You'll be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles in one of our super hip replica cities. A massive screen behind him lit up, showing a complex map and images of 3 distinct types of robots. These are your opponents. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers. each worth a different amount of villain points. Your goal? Use your quirks to immobilize as many as you can and rack up a heroic score. Murmur went into overdrive. The hunched, scribbling shadow at Izuku's side was practically vibrating. Okay, 3-point values. The 3-pointers are likely heavily armored, high risk, high reward. The 1-pointers are common, low risk, but require volume to be effective. A strategy focusing on 2-pointers offers the best balance of risk-to-reward ratio. We need to ascertain their distribution density in the arena. We need to know their weak points, their movement patterns. And one more thing! Present Mix's voice cut through Murmur's frantic analysis. There's a 4th type of villain. The 0-pointer. This big guy is more of an obstacle. He's worth 0 points. Think of him like a thwomp from Super Mario. My advice? Run away. Before Izuku could even process that, a hand shot up in the crowd. A tall, well-built boy with glasses stood up, chopping the air with rigid, formal movements. It was the same boy Izuku had seen scolding Bakugo in the courtyard. Tenya Ida? Excuse me, sir, I have a question. Ida's voice was loud and clear. On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a gross error for Japan's top hero academy to make. And you? He spun around, pointing a stiff, accusatory finger directly at Izuku. Izuku froze, pinned by the sudden attention. Flicker flared violently, convinced he was about to be expelled on the spot. You with the messy green hair! Ida declared. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting and disrespectful. If you are not taking this exam seriously, then you should leave. The accusation hit a raw nerve. Muttering. The thing he was mocked for. The habit that Murmur was born from. A sharp, hot spike of anger shot through Izuku. It was the familiar, ugly feeling of being misunderstood, of being unfairly judged. He felt the subtle, telltale tearing sensation as a jagged, aggressive shadow began to form in his subconscious. Spite wanted out. Spite wanted to tell this stuck-up, four-eyed jerk exactly where he could shove his rigid hand chops. Down, boy, Izuku thought, gritting his teeth. He focused on valor, forcing the warmth of courage to smother the hot spark of anger. Not now. He's not the enemy. He forced himself to shrink in his seat, bowing his head in apology, even though every fiber of his being screamed in protest. It was a tactical retreat. He had bigger robots to fry. President Mike answered Ida's question, explaining the 0-pointer was an arena trap, before sending them off to their designated battle centers. Izuku, flustered and still fighting to keep his internal army from open mutiny, found himself at Battle Center B, standing before another set of colossal gates. He was in a group with the nice, round-faced girl he'd saved from tripping earlier, and the loud, engine-legged boy who had just publicly shamed him. Bakugo, thankfully, was in a different center. A small mercy. The gates began to slide open with a low groan, revealing a sprawling, eerily silent cityscape. A.M. Go! President Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The other examinees shot off the line like cannonballs. Ida's calves roared to life, propelling him into the city in a blur. The girl, Uraraka, was already tapping robots, making them float helplessly into the air. Izuku was left standing in the dust. He was frozen. They're all gone. Flicker wailed. All the points will be taken. We're too late. A tactical error, Murmur scribbled frantically in his mental notebook. Hesitation at the start is a critical failure. The initial distribution of low-point villains is always the highest near the entrance. We have already missed the optimal window. A hero doesn't wait. A third, calmer voice echoed in his mind. It was valor. Izuku's head snapped up. He was right. He was a commander. And his first command was to move. Go! He whispered, and his legs finally obeyed, pumping hard as he sprinted into the mock city. He rounded a corner, and came face to face with his first opponent. A 1-pointer. It was a squat, green machine on a single tread, its red optical sensor swiveling to focus on him. It was fast, rolling towards him with a menacing whir. Flicker screamed bloody murder in his head. Danger! It's going to run you over. Dodge. Run! Murmur was already dissecting it. Minimal armor plating. The main chassis houses the power source, but it's too thick. The tread mechanism has multiple exposed joints. The camera eye is a classic weak point, but small and hard to hit. The most vulnerable area is the articulation point where the tread assembly connects to the main body. Valor simply wanted to charge, to meet the threat head-on. This was it. The first test. Izuku had to be the conductor. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. He couldn't wait for doubt to finish his dissertation. He had to synthesize and act. He took Murmur's raw data, exposed joints, and ignored Flicker's command to flee. He channeled his will into his heroic echo. Valor, the right side! The joint in the treads! Now! He yelled, pointing. The command was an impulse, a surge of pure intent. The glowing green shadow that was tethered to him lunged. Valor wasn't a separate entity. He was an extension of Izuku's will. The echo's fist, solid as a wrecking ball, slammed into the robot's tread assembly. There was a satisfying crunch of protesting metal, and the one-pointer's tread snapped. It listed to one side, spinning in a helpless circle, neutralized. Villain points 1. Izuku stared for a second, his chest heaving. It worked. It actually worked. He hadn't just used an ability, he had led a team. A surge of elation shot through him, strengthening Valor's glow. He broke into a run, his eyes scanning the streets. This was the rhythm. Analyze, command, execute. He saw a two-pointer bearing down on another examinee, a boy with a tail who was already occupied with two other bots. The two-pointer was bigger, sleeker, with two pincer-like arms. Multiple threat vectors, Murmur noted. Heavier armor. The joints are reinforced. We can't fight that. Flicker shrieked. Help the other boy, but don't get close. Izuku saw the boy with the tail was about to be overwhelmed. He needed a distraction. A plan, born of desperation and Tashinori's lessons, flashed in his mind. He could turn his weakness into a weapon. He deliberately focused on Flicker's panic, feeding it, letting the terror wash over him. Flicker, now! Over there! He pointed to a spot 10 feet to the robot's left. The trembling, translucent echo zipped away from him, appearing in an alleyway. Flicker did what Flicker did best, he panicked. He cowered and trembled, a perfect, spectral image of pure terror. To a human, it was just a strange shimmer. But the robot's sensors, programmed to detect the biosigns of panicked civilians, locked onto the phantom reading. Its red eye swiveled away from the tailed boy and towards the alley. The distraction gave the other boy the opening he needed. With a powerful swing of his tail, he smashed one of his opponents, then vaulted over the other to disable it. He shot Izuku a grateful, confused look before dashing off in search of more points. Izuku let out a breath, reabsorbing Flicker's panicked energy. His heart was pounding from the forced fear response, but it had worked. He was learning. He ducked into an alley to catch his breath. So far, so good. He had 1 point, and he'd helped someone. But 1 point wasn't going to get him into UA. He needed to be more aggressive. He peered around the corner, and saw another two-pointer. This one was cornering a girl, who seemed to have a gigantification quirk but was struggling to activate it. The robot was taking cheap shots, trying to wear her down. The unfairness of it, the bullying tactic, grated on him. It reminded him of the sludge villain. It reminded him of Kaken. That familiar, hot, ugly anger sparked in his gut. This time, he didn't suppress it. He cultivated it. He's too strong, let Valor handle it, came Valor's steadying influence. The odds of a direct confrontation are unfavorable, Murmur calculated. Don't do it! It's too dangerous. Flicker pleaded. Izuku ignored all of them. This wasn't a job for courage or caution. This was a job for anger, spite. He hissed, the name feeling sharp on his tongue. Go! The jagged, dark echo tore itself from his shadow with a silent snarl. It was a blur of aggressive energy, not a hero, but a predator. It didn't charge the robot's front. It zipped around the side, a flicker of darkness too fast for the robot's sensors to track. Spite wasn't strong like Valor, but it was vicious and brutally efficient. Its shadowy, claw-like hands didn't punch, they tore. It found a maintenance hatch on the robot's back, a spot Murmur hadn't even had time to analyze, and ripped it open with pure malicious force. Wires and circuits sparked. Spite plunged a hand inside and yanked, pulling out a handful of spectral cables. The two-pointer seized up, its lights flickering out. It collapsed into a heap of dead metal, smoke pouring from the hole in its back. Villain points 3. The takedown was shockingly fast. And a little horrifying. Spite stood over the corpse of the robot for a second, its jagged form vibrating with triumphant malice, before Izuku forced it back. Enough, Spite. Recede, he commanded, the effort leaving him breathless. The anger drained away, leaving him feeling cold and empty. He had used it. He had controlled it. But he didn't like how it felt. The girl who'd been cornered finally managed to activate her quirk, growing to a massive size. She gave him a thumbs up before stomping off to find a bigger target. Izuku leaned against the wall, his mind a whirlwind. He was the commander of a chaotic, dysfunctional squad of his own emotions. Valor was his knight, Flicker his scout, Murmur his intelligence officer, and Spite was his assassin. This quirk was a nightmare. And it was the only reason he was still in this exam. From a few blocks away, atop a 5-story building, Katsuki Bakugo paused his rampage. He blasted a 3-pointer into shrapnel, his hands smoking. He was racking up points with explosive efficiency, a one-man army. But his crimson eyes weren't scanning for his next target. They were scanning for a ghost. He kept seeing it. Flashes of green. Not just Deku's stupid hair, but more. He'd seen a glowing green shape slam a robot into a wall. He'd seen a darting, vicious black streak disable another from behind. He saw Deku, quirkless, useless Deku, just standing there, pointing, like he was giving orders. It didn't make any sense. Quirks were singular. You shot fire. You ran fast. You turned to steel. You didn't command a squad of multicolored phantoms. It was sloppy. It was weird. It was cheating somehow, and it was infuriating. Because whatever the hell Deku was doing, it was working. Bakugo let out a frustrated roar and blasted another robot, trying to blow away the image of his childhood victim succeeding with some impossible, nonsensical power. The last 2 minutes of the exam were a frantic scramble. Izuku managed to use his team to take down another 2 1-pointers and 1 more 2-pointer. His total was 7, a respectable number, but probably not enough. He was physically and mentally drained. Conducting his internal orchestra was more exhausting than any workout Toshinori had ever devised. Then the ground began to shake. It started as a low, deep tremor that vibrated up through the soles of his shoes. A collective gasp rose from the examinees scattered across the city. The shaking intensified, knocking loose chunks of concrete from the buildings, and then it appeared, rising from behind a block of skyscrapers, casting a shadow that swallowed the entire street, was the 0-pointer. It was immense. A mechanical titan easily 20 stories high, all dark green metal and ponderous, hydraulic limbs. Its head was a single, vast, unblinking red eye. It wasn't an opponent, it was a force of nature. A mobile mountain. Every instinct in Izuku's body screamed at once. Flicker completely and utterly lost it. The trembling, translucent echo became almost opaque, a solid wall of pure terror manifesting in front of Izuku. Run! It shrieked, the silent scream so powerful it felt like a physical blow. It's the 0-pointer. It's worthless. We can't fight that. Run! Run now! Flicker's panic was so absolute it threatened to overwhelm him, to seize control of his legs and force them to flee with the rest of the stampeding students. Everyone was running, a screaming tide of humanity flowing away from the mechanical god. But as Izuku turned to join them, he heard a small, pained cry. Ow! He whipped his head around. It was the nice girl, Uraraka. She was on the ground, her ankle trapped beneath a huge slab of concrete, debris from a building the 0-pointer had clipped on its way past. She was trying to push it off, but it was too heavy. She looked up at the approaching behemoth, her face pale with terror. In that instant, everything else fell away. The points. The exam. His own exhaustion. All that existed was a girl in trouble and a monster bearing down on her. The need to save someone, the foundational bedrock of his entire being, slammed into his consciousness with the force of a tidal wave. It was a feeling more powerful than Flicker's fear, more focused than Murmur's analysis, more pure than Spite's rage. It was the very essence of valor. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think. His body, for the third time in his life, moved on its own. He ran towards the danger. "Hey!" a voice yelled. It was Ida, pausing his escape to look back in disbelief. "What are you doing, you fool? You'll be killed!" Izuku didn't hear him. He was locked on. The zero-pointer was raising its massive, building-sized fist for a smash. They had seconds. This wasn't a problem he could solve with a cheap shot from Spite or a distraction from Flicker. This required power. Raw, unadulterated power. He poured every last drop of his heroic will, his desperate desire to protect, into his heroic echo. He felt valor tear from him, not as a shadow, but as a semi-physical being of pure, incandescent green light. The echo grew, solidified, its form more real and tangible than ever before. "Valor!" Izuku screamed, his voice raw. "The debris! Lift it!" While his echoes surged forward, Izuku's own physical body did something else. He ran to Uraraka, who was staring in wide-eyed shock at the glowing green giant that had just appeared. Smaller pieces of rubble were raining down from the damaged buildings. Without a second thought, Izuku threw himself over her, shielding her small frame with his own, his arms wrapped around his head. He was just a boy. He had no super durability. But it was what a hero would do. Valor reached the slab of concrete. The echo let out a silent roar of exertion and slammed its glowing shoulders underneath the massive weight. Its form strained, the green light flickering violently under the immense pressure. Metal groaned. The concrete shifted, scraping against the asphalt. The structural integrity of Valor's form is failing. Murmur shrieked in his mind. The psychic energy required is unsustainable. He's not strong enough. Flicker wailed. But Izuku, huddled over Uraraka, gritted his teeth and pushed more of himself into the act. "Lift!" he commanded with his entire soul. With a final, gargantuan effort, Valor shoved the slab upwards, lifting it a precious 2 feet off the ground. "Now!" Izuku yelled, grabbing Uraraka's arm and pulling her free. He dragged her a few feet away just as Valor's form finally gave out. The echo dissolved into a cloud of green motes with a sound like shattering light, and the massive slab of concrete crashed back to the ground with a deafening boom. They were safe. The zero-pointer's colossal fist came down where they had been moments before, smashing the street into a crater. But the behemoth was already moving past them, its programming designating them as no longer in its path. A deafeningly loud buzzer echoed across the city. "Time's up!" The exam was over. Izuku collapsed onto the cracked pavement, not from injury, but from a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. It felt as if his very essence had been scooped out, leaving him a hollow shell. He had 7 villain points. He had faced down the ultimate obstacle and saved someone, but he'd earned nothing for it. He had probably failed. Uraraka, meanwhile, was on her feet. She looked from the crater to Izuku, and then put her hands together. "Release!" she said, touching his shoulder. He suddenly felt lighter, a strange sense of nausea washing over him. He realized she had been using her quirk on him to negate the strain. She then rushed over to the debris she'd been trapped under and did the same, causing the massive slab to float harmlessly in the air. "That was amazing!" she said, her cheeks flushed with adrenaline and gratitude. "Your quirk, it's like you have a whole team. Thank you. You saved me." Izuku could only offer a weak, tired smile. The other examinees were slowly filtering back, staring at the destruction, at the floating debris, at Izuku lying on the ground. Ida was staring at him with a look of dawning, horrified respect, and high above, Bakugo stood motionless. He had seen it all. He saw the glowing green giant, an entity of pure power, straining against a weight that would have crushed a dozen men. And he saw Deku, worthless, pebble-in-the-road Deku, shielding the girl with his own breakable body. It was 2 separate actions, 2 distinct beings, working in perfect, impossible sync. It wasn't a single quirk. It was a legion. And the one commanding it was the last person on Earth Bakugo would have ever thought capable of leading anything. A profound, unsettling mix of fury, shock, and a feeling he couldn't name twisted in his gut. His world, and his place in it, had just been irrevocably tilted on its axis. As the paramedics arrived and Recovery Girl began making her rounds, Izuku lay on the asphalt, the world swimming around him. He had failed the test by its own metrics, but as he looked at Uraraka, safe and sound, he knew he had passed a different, more important one. He had brought all the warring, chaotic, broken pieces of himself together, and for a few crucial moments, they had become a hero. He was the sum of his parts. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. 1 week later, a single envelope sat on the Midoriya family's dining table. It wasn't a standard letter. It was thick, made of high-quality paper, and bore the unmistakable crimson wax seal of UA High School. It felt less like a piece of mail and more like a verdict. Izuku stared at it, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The past 7 days had been a special kind of torment. He replayed the practical exam over and over in his mind, a torturous loop of his own perceived failures. 7 points. He'd earned a measly 7 villain points. Others, he'd heard them boasting as they left the battle center, had racked up scores of 40, 50, even 60. Bakugo, he'd overheard someone say, had gotten 77, the highest score of all. 7 points. It was a failing grade. He knew it. The statistical probability of acceptance with a single-digit villain point score is functionally 0, a familiar, dry voice whispered in his mind. Murmur was a cold weight in his stomach, offering no comfort, only the harsh calculus of failure. We didn't pass, Flicker's silent terror echoed, making his hands tremble. They're going to laugh at us. Everyone will know we weren't good enough. Izuku? Aren't you going to open it? His mother, Inko, stood in the doorway, wringing a dish towel in her hands. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of hope and anxiety that mirrored his own. He reached for the envelope, his fingers fumbling with the seal. Inside was not a letter, but a small disc-like device. He placed it on the table and it flickered to life, projecting a holographic image into the air. I am here! As a projection! Izuku and his mother both yelped as the image of All Might, in his full, heroic glory, filled their small apartment. Young Midoriya! My apologies for the theatrics, but I now have a position on the faculty at UA, and one of the perks is getting to deliver the good news. All Might beamed, his holographic smile as bright as the sun. Let's cut to the chase. Your performance in the written exam was exemplary. As for the practical, you earned 7 villain points. Izuku's heart plummeted. His mother let out a small, pained whimper. He knew it. Ordinarily, All Might continued, his voice growing serious, that score would not be enough to pass. However, that was only half of the test. The hologram shifted, displaying grainy security footage from the exam. It showed the zero-pointer, the panic stampede of students, and one small, green-haired figure running towards the danger. Did you really think a hero academy as prestigious as UA would run a test that completely ignores the most fundamental quality of a hero? The will to save others, even at great personal risk? That would be a gross oversight. We have rescue points. A second, hidden scoring metric judged by a panel of faculty members based on acts of altruism, heroism, and self-sacrifice. The footage zoomed in, showing Uraraka, her face pale with fear, trapped beneath the rubble. Then it showed Izuku, shielding her with his own body while a glowing green apparition, Valor, in all his glory, strained to lift the impossible weight. Achiko Uraraka. All Might's voice boomed. After you saved her, she went directly to the proctors and offered to give you some of her own points. An incredible display of gratitude and character. The hologram showed another student, Ida, his hand raised stiffly. Tenya Ida! Multiple witnesses reported him being inspired by your actions to double back and ensure other fleeing students were safe. Your courage was infectious. The screen filled with a scoreboard. Izuku's name was near the bottom in villain points. But then, a new column lit up, rescue points. The number next to his name began to climb, spinning like a slot machine before locking in. Izuku Midoriya, villain points 7. Rescue points 60. Total 67. He had passed. He was in second place, just behind Bakugo. The breath left Izuku's body in a rush. The tension that had been coiling in his gut for a week snapped. Tears streamed down his face, silent and hot. Inko was openly sobbing, a mess of happy, hiccuping cries. Your quirk, Chronishade, is unorthodox, powerful, and deeply psychological, All Might's projection said, his smile softening. You demonstrated not only the will to be a hero, but the first crucial steps towards commanding the complex power within you. You saved someone. You inspired others. You were a hero. The projection looked directly at Izuku, its blue eyes seeming to pierce through the holographic static. Welcome, young Midoriya. This is your Hero Academy. The projection fizzled out, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Izuku looked at his trembling hands, then at his crying mother. He was going to UA. The impossible dream, nurtured in notebooks and forged on a beach of trash, was real. He had taken the broken pieces of himself and built a key. And now, he had unlocked the door. The first day of school was a trial by anxiety. Just putting on the UA uniform, a crisp gray blazer, white shirt, and dark teal trousers, felt surreal. The tie, a bold red splash of color, felt like a noose he was tightening himself. He could feel his echo stirring, reacting to the cocktail of excitement and terror churning inside him. Finding Class 1A was an adventure in itself. The door was absurdly oversized, presumably to accommodate students with gigantification or mutant-type quirks. Taking a deep breath, he slid it open. He was immediately met with a familiar scene of conflict. Tenya Ida was standing rigidly before Bakugo, who was slouched in a chair with his feet propped up on the desk. Take your feet off that desk! Ida commanded, his arms chopping the air. Such an action is an insult to our upperclassmen and the master craftsmen who built these desks. You kidding me? Bakugo sneered, a lazy, arrogant grin on his face. What junior high you from, you stuck-up extra? Izuku froze in the doorway, a deer in the headlights. He just wanted to find a seat and become invisible. But it was too late. Ida spotted him. You! He exclaimed, marching over. Good morning! I am Tenya Ida from Soulmate Private Academy. I heard. Izuku squeaked. I'm Midoriya. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya. Ida's expression became deadly serious. He bowed a stiff 90 degrees. I must apologize to you. During the exam, I misjudged you completely. While I was focused on the parameters of the test, you grasped its true nature. You are the superior student. I was blinded by my own preconceptions. The sudden, intense praise was almost as bad as the scolding. Izuku felt his face flush. He could feel Flicker cringing at the attention, while Murmur catalogued the social awkwardness of the situation. Before he could stammer out a reply, a cheerful voice cut in. Oh! It's you! Plain face! He turned to see the round-faced girl from the exam, Achiko Uraraka, beaming at him. That stunt with the zero-pointer was incredible! Your quirk is so cool! You were all like BM, and that glowing guy was like whoosh. I'm Uraraka, by the way. Between Ida's formal apology and Uraraka's bubbly energy, Izuku was completely overwhelmed. His echoes were a low hum in the back of his mind, a flickering, muttering chorus of his own social anxiety. This was Class 1A. And he was already the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave. The voice was tired, dry, and utterly devoid of emotion. It cut through the classroom chatter like a knife. Everyone froze. Lying on the floor behind the teacher's podium, cocooned in a bright yellow sleeping bag like a miserable caterpillar, was a man with long, unkempt black hair and a weary, bloodshot gaze. He took a long slurp from a juice pouch before unzipping himself, and rising to his feet with an audible groan. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, he said, his eyes scanning the room. They were dark, perceptive, and seemed to miss nothing. Time is a precious resource. You lot aren't being rational enough. He stepped up to the podium. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Now, put these on and meet me on the field. He held up a blue UA gym uniform. There was no welcome speech. No orientation. Just a command. The abruptness of it was jarring, and as the class shuffled out to the locker rooms, a sense of unease settled over them. Aizawa's eyes lingered on Izuku for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else. He had read the file. He'd seen the footage. Chronishade. A volatile, psychologically driven emitter-type quirk with multiple manifestations. A logistical and pedagogical nightmare. This was going to be a headache. The sun was bright and hot on the training field. The 20 students of Class 1A stood in a line, clad in their new gym uniforms. A quirk apprehension test? The class exclaimed in unison. But what about orientation? The opening ceremony? Uraraka asked, looking worried. UA isn't a normal school, Aizawa said, his voice flat. We don't have time for frivolous ceremonies. You're here to become heroes. And that starts now. He held up a device that looked like a souped-up smartphone. You've all been doing these since junior high. The 50-meter dash, grip strength, standing long jump, but you were never allowed to use your quirks. Here, that rule doesn't apply. We're going to push your powers to their absolute limits to get a baseline reading of your potential. A wave of excitement rippled through the class. This is gonna be awesome, said a boy with red, spiky hair. I can finally go all out, exclaimed a girl with pink skin and antennae. Izuku's stomach twisted into a knot. Go all out? His all out was a chaotic, internal civil war that sometimes spilled out into reality. How was he supposed to apply that to a 50-meter dash? Bakugo, Aizawa called out, his voice sharp. You got the highest score on the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in junior high? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted, stepping forward. Try it with your quirk. Bakugo took the softball, a vicious grin spreading across his face. He wound up, his palm crackling with explosive energy. Dai! He roared, launching the ball with a massive explosion. The ball shot into the sky like a rocket, leaving a trail of smoke. Aizawa held up the device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. The class gasped. That was the benchmark. That was the level of power they were up against. And one more thing, Aizawa said, a cruel, thin smile gracing his lips. Just to add a little motivation, the student who ranks last in total points across all 8 tests will be judged to have 0 potential. And will be expelled. Immediately, the proclamation landed like a bomb. What? Expelled? On the first day? This wasn't a test. This was a death match. Izuku felt a wave of cold, absolute panic wash over him. Flicker, who had been a faint, trembling presence, suddenly flared into high-definition terror. The world seemed to tilt, the edges of his vision going fuzzy. Expelled. We're going to be last. We can't compete with them. We're going to be kicked out. Our dream is over before it even began. He was going to be last. He knew it. He didn't have a simple, applicable quirk. He couldn't run faster, jump higher, or throw harder. Not on his own. He was still just a quirkless kid on the inside, piloting a broken, haunted machine. The first test, 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired against Ida. As they took their positions, Ida's calves began to rumble, small exhaust ports flaring to life. Recipro burst, he yelled, and shot off the line like a bullet, finishing in 3.04 seconds. Izuku just ran. He ran as fast as his physically trained but quirkless legs could carry him. 7.02 seconds. It was a decent time for a normal human, but here, it was pathetic. He was already near the bottom of the rankings. The second test, grip strength. He squeezed the device with all his might. His muscles, honed by 10 months of hauling trash, burned with the effort. 56 kilograms. A respectable score. But then the boy with multiple arms, Mizo Shoji, stepped up. He used several of his dupli arms to grip the device, shattering the school record with a score of 540 kilograms. Izuku's score was meaningless. He was sinking. Test after test, it was the same story. Standing long jump, repeated side steps. He performed adequately as a baseline human, but he was hopelessly outclassed by the sheer, raw power of his classmates' quirks. He couldn't figure out how to apply his own. What was he supposed to do? Have Flicker cry at the sandbox? Ask Murmur to calculate the optimal angle for a jump he couldn't physically make? He was in last place. The threat of expulsion was a physical weight on his shoulders, growing heavier with each failure. Then came the ball throw. His last chance? As he stepped up to the circle, the whispers started. That's the kid who got in with just 7 villain points, right? Seriously? How'd he even pass? Guess the rumors were true. He's got a really weak quirk. Or maybe none at all. Each whisper was a fresh jab, feeding the ugliest part of him. A hot, familiar anger began to simmer in his gut. He could feel spite stirring, eager to lash out, to prove them all wrong with raw, unfocused aggression. The jagged echo wanted to take the ball and just throw it, to do something, anything, to fight back. No, Izuku thought, his hand tightening around the softball. Violence isn't the answer here. I need power. I need valor. He closed his eyes, trying to summon the feeling of heroic courage. But it was impossible. The weight of his failures, the fear of expulsion, the sting of the other students' words, it was a toxic cocktail that drowned out any heroic sentiment. Flicker was screaming about failure, Murmur was listing all the ways this throw could go wrong, and Spite was snarling about injustice. Valor was nowhere to be found. He had no choice. He had to rely on his own strength. He wound up, putting every ounce of his physically trained power into the throw, just as he had with all might on the beach. He threw 46 meters. He stared at the pathetic number on Aizawa's device. It was a death sentence. I was right. Aizawa's voice was cold. Izuku felt his blood run cold. Your quirk is unreliable and impractical. You can't control it. You have zero potential. As Aizawa spoke, his eyes flashed red, and the long gray scarf around his neck shot out, wrapping around Izuku with impossible speed, binding him tightly. A strange, heavy sensation washed over him. He felt empty. The flickering presence of his echoes, the constant hum of their emotions in the back of his mind, vanished completely. He was alone in his own head for the first time in months. It was terrifying. That's my quirk erasure, Aizawa said, his black hair floating around his head as if underwater. I can nullify the quirks of anyone I look at. Looking at your records, Midoriya, your power is tied to moments of extreme emotional resonance. A desperate need to save someone, overwhelming fear, crippling self-doubt. You can't just turn it on. You're a liability. A hero who can't control his power is nothing more than a villain waiting to happen. You can't be a hero, the words. They were the same words All Might had said on that rooftop. The same fundamental truth he had fought against his entire life. He was being told, once again, that he was not enough, and something inside him snapped. It wasn't Valor's courage. It wasn't Flicker's fear. It was something deeper. A core of pure, stubborn defiance. A refusal to accept the verdict. A lifetime of being told no had built up a pressure that had to be released. Aizawa blinked, and his erasure deactivated. The heavy, empty feeling vanished, and the echoes came rushing back into Izuku's consciousness with the force of a tidal wave. Flicker was screaming, terrified of the teacher, of the scarf, of failing. He's going to expel us. It's over. Murmur was in overdrive, analyzing erasure, analyzing Aizawa's words, calculating the infinitesimal chance of reversing this judgment. His logic is sound. Based on current performance metrics, expulsion is the most rational outcome. But it was the third voice, the one he had tried to suppress, that rose above the others. Spite was not just angry. It was furious. The jagged echo manifested at his side, no longer a mere shimmer, but a solid-looking being of pure, solidified resentment. It wasn't directed at the other students anymore. It was directed at Aizawa, at the world. At the very idea that he wasn't allowed to try. You don't get to tell me what I can be. The thought was not his own, but Spite's. It was a roar of pure, defiant rage, and Izuku, for the first time, didn't fight it. He didn't suppress it. He leaned into it. He grabbed hold of that raw, untamed fury and aimed it. He took the second ball Aizawa offered him. He stepped back into the circle. His knuckles were white. He wasn't thinking about being a hero. He wasn't thinking about saving anyone. He was thinking about a lifetime of being underestimated. He was thinking about Kaken's sneer, the doctor's pitying look, All Might's initial rejection, and now Aizawa's cold, logical dismissal. He poured all of that frustration, all of that rage, all of that defiant spite into his right arm. As he began to throw, he felt spite surge, not as a separate entity, but as an infusion of power. The jagged echo's shadowy form seemed to merge with his own arm, overlaying it with a dark, crackling aura. But at the last second, another presence asserted itself. Valor. Awakened by this profound act of defiance, this refusal to give up on his dream, the heroic echo manifested. It didn't try to take over. Instead, it tempered the rage. Valor's steadying, heroic will wrapped around spite's raw fury, containing it, focusing it, giving it purpose beyond mere destruction. And in that moment, Izuku felt something new. Integration. His rage wasn't fighting his courage. They were working together. The force of a lifetime of resentment, channeled by the unbreakable will of a hero. He threw the ball. There was no explosion like Bakugo's. There was just a sound, a sharp crack like a thunderclap, as the ball left his hand. It shot forward, not up, a white speck disappearing into the horizon, leaving a visible distortion in the air behind it. It was propelled by a force that was both physical and psychic, a testament to the raw power of his integrated emotions. The entire class was silent, staring in stunned disbelief. Bakugo's jaw was slack, his eyes wide with shock and a dawning, furious understanding. Izuku's arm throbbed, not with pain, but with a strange, humming energy. He looked at his hand, then at Aizawa. The teacher's device beeped. He turned it around. 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo. By a tenth of a meter. He had done it not by suppressing his negative emotions, but by harnessing them. Aizawa's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before his neutral mask slammed back into place. But this time, the look in his eyes was different. It wasn't dismissal. It was a grudging, analytical respect. He lowered his scarf. "You're not a one-trick pony, Midoriya," Aizawa said, his voice low enough that only Izuku could hear. The cruel, thin smile returned, but this time it seemed almost genuine. "You're a stampede. A chaotic, emotional mess of a quirk that could level a city block by accident if you're not careful." He paused, his gaze intense. "But you just proved you can aim that stampede. You can put all that chaos behind a single, focused action. You're not a lost cause." He turned to the class. "And for the record, the expulsion thing was a lie," the class erupted. "It was a logical ruse." "Of course it was," said a tall girl with a black ponytail, Momo Yaorosa. "It was obviously a tactic to get us to push past our limits." Aizawa ignored them, his eyes still on Izuku. He had seen it. He saw the surge of dark, resentful energy, and then he saw the flicker of heroic green light that had contained and focused it. He saw a boy who wasn't just using his emotions, he was conducting them. The kid was a bigger headache than he thought, but his potential was terrifying. Izuku stood there, his heart still hammering, but for a different reason. He hadn't just passed the test. He had made a breakthrough. He had stared into the abyss of his own anger and resentment, and instead of falling in, he had built a bridge. He had learned that spite didn't have to be a liability. Harnessed correctly, it was a weapon, a powerful, dangerous, but necessary part of his arsenal. As the final scores were posted, Izuku saw his name. He was no longer in last place. Thanks to the massive points from the ball throw, he had climbed to the middle of the pack. He was safe. He caught Bakugo's eye from across the field. The look on his childhood friend's face was something he had never seen before. It wasn't just anger. It was confusion, frustration, and a sliver of something that looked almost like fear. The quirkless, useless Deku he had built his entire worldview around was gone. In his place was this impossible boy who could pull power from his own feelings, who could outthrow him without so much as a spark. The first day was over. Izuku had been tested, judged, and threatened with expulsion. He had faced down his own teacher and his own inner demons. And he had won. But as he looked around at his classmates, at the monumental challenge that Yuri represented, he knew this was just the beginning. The war within him was far from over. He had just learned how to aim one of his cannons. He still had a whole army to master,